seems to give us a very full, well-rounded impression of Jesus, often tender, caring, and very quick to help anyone in need, but also often surprising with his words or his attitude. The final lines of this lesson make complete sense, even without giving them great depth of consideration. Yes, of course, the person who can be trusted to give us our change to the penny when we send them on an errand can be trusted with more. And yes, divided loyalties create problems. We see that in marriage, in politics, in the workplace, and in our friendships. We can't be equally loyal to conflicting ideals or conflicting personal interests. One will surpass the other in our hearts and then in our actions. But the tricky part of this lesson, the problematic message for me, is Jesus saying to make friends for yourself with your dishonest wealth. The landowner praises the dishonest employee for his shrewdness in setting himself up to land softly after being fired. And Jesus suggests that was the right thing to do. To take advantage of the situation in order to create a network of support, even though it was dishonest to do so in the way the employee did it. Superficially, that sounds like Jesus said it's good to steal. However, we know that can't be the case because Jesus wouldn't teach us that it is right to break the 10 Commandments. He wouldn't do that, would he? Unless, maybe, breaking the thou shalt not steal commandment allowed you to keep the love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength commandment. And also allowed you to love your neighbor as yourself, that second greatest of rules. As Americans, and especially as white Americans, we're in the position of the shrewd steward without even knowing it. We have a position of privilege, of advantage over others that we did nothing to earn or to deserve. We are not born better than people from other countries. We are not born better than people with darker skin pigments, people whose skin is darker than my own. But we control the balance sheet of life when it comes to advantages in this global society in which we live. We have basically three choices. We can continue on with our lives, choosing to remain ignorant to our advantage, walking through life as if all that we have is ours because we've earned it, and telling ourselves that everyone has the same opportunities as we have. We can recognize that there are doors that open easier for us because of the place of our birth and because of our complexion. Feel guilty for that inequality of our privilege and do our best not to accept the unequal preferential treatment given us. Or we can recognize our advantage and use it to help those who are disadvantaged. Becoming aware of how much easier we have it than others can be a very painful experience. It's difficult to know that the reason I can buy clothes for less money at Walmart is because there are people being paid very poorly in other countries, working long hours in unsafe and unfair conditions, so that I can buy a blouse for $5. A blouse those workers can't afford to own. It's difficult to enjoy my chocolates when I know that much of the chocolate production in the world is supported by slave labor. People forced to work harvesting chocolate, being given barely enough food to survive. It's hard to buy tennis shoes knowing the people making them can't afford them, but that the athletes whose names and faces are used to market them are paid millions of dollars for their endorsement of the product. It's also difficult to know that simply boycotting the products isn't a real solution. When it comes to shoes, we don't have a lot of choices. Almost all of our tennis shoes are made under the same conditions and marketed to us in the same way. If we're going to wear quality tennis shoes, and by that I mean all of that athletic shoe type thing, if we're going to take good care of our feet, we'll be using our dollars to support that unjust system. But if we refuse to purchase those shoes, then the workers who are relying on their very poor pay to support themselves and their families will not have jobs. So what do? Ignore the advantage we have, buy the shoes, and carry guilt around with us? Or buy the shoes, claim our advantage, and do something to affect that corrupt system? Granted, it would take a massive, well-organized movement to change our market system. It won't be easy to convince consumers or merchants that we shouldn't be paying celebrities millions to coax us into buying products that are manufactured by people who are struggling to survive on their income from making those products. But as Christians, that's part of being shrewd with our ill-gotten gains, our gains of fair pay for jobs that we ourselves didn't establish, our gains of being at the top of the food chain in the global market by virtue of our location in this country. On a smaller, more personal scale, what about the advantages we have in our own communities? What about the perception of retailers in general toward their customers? Do you feel comfortable walking into any store, shopping, looking at merchandise, picking it up, handling it, getting a close look, and putting it back without wondering whether you might be being scrutinized as a possible shoplifter? Do you know that's a privilege granted to you because of your skin color? And do you know that that is so ingrained in our thinking that white is somehow better than black, that even among people of color, the level of suspicion is higher toward other people of color than toward whites? There are things we can do. I read a story recently, a true story, about two women shopping together. Both women were biracial. They were sisters-in-law. One had dark skin, the other was very fair complected. In the checkout line, the lighter-skinned woman went first. She paid for her merchandise. After having been greeted very friendly by the cashier, and the cashier chit-chatting as she rang up the order, handed the cashier a check. The cashier looked at it very quickly, ran it through the little check system, stuck it in the drawer, and said, "Have a wonderful day." Looked at the next person in line, the darker-skinned sister-in-law, did not speak to her, did not look in her face again, rang up the merchandise, mumbled the total. The woman wrote her check and handed it, and the cashier said, "ID." Checked the driver's license against the check, picked up her book of names of people who had written bad checks, made a big show of searching very carefully through that book for the woman's name, acted disappointed when she didn't find it, put the book away, got out her thumbprint thing, and took a thumbprint to put on the check of the woman. By this time, the other sister-in-law had had enough. She was well aware that they were treated differently because her skin color made her look like she was white. And she said to the cashier, "Why are you doing this?" The cashier's response was, "I'm just following procedure. This is my job." And she said, "You didn't do this to the white woman ahead of me in line. You didn't do this to me. Why are you doing this to her?" The cashier said, "Because you're regulars. I didn't feel the need to be as thorough with you." To which the fair-skinned sister-in-law responded, "This is my first time in your store. This woman, however, shops here every week." Obviously, with this disruption, the other customers standing in line were listening in and hearing what was going on. The cashier was forced to look at herself and her attitudes. The store was forced to take notice as well. That first woman, the fair-skinned sister-in-law, had a choice to make as she stood waiting for her companion. She could remain blind to the inequity, notice it had happened, but be glad it hadn't happened to her, or use her advantage of being fairer-skinned than her sister-in-law to speak up. She took advantage of the unfair advantage to create change. We all have opportunities on a regular basis to use our advantage to serve others. Whether it's a young person being treated unfairly because of their youth, or a person of color getting unequal treatment compared to a white person, or a woman being treated as less than a man, or a person of lower means treated like they are less, even less valuable than a person of apparently greater wealth, or a less educated person, or a disabled person, or a person with Asperger's, or with dementia, or a manner of dress that is too out of the ordinary, or any number of other challenges that make them at a disadvantage. We have a choice to make. We can be blind to the situation. We can breathe a sigh of relief and think to ourselves, there, but by the grace of God, go I. Or we can take advantage of our advantage to right a wrong. Use our privilege as normal people to advocate for others. Use the blessings we've done nothing to earn to help those less fortunate. Jesus asked the crowd whether they would be faithful with their advantage. He continues to ask us that same question today. Will we be faithful for the privileges we have? Will we serve God using our advantage to the advantage of others? Or will we serve ourselves, keeping the advantages for our own benefit? May we all be found faithful to the God who is faithful to us, to the God who loves us without limits. Amen.